Thank you for joining us. I'm Megan Pistole-Shaw, the Education and Outreach Coordinator with SLELO PRISM, and I'll be facilitating today's webcast. As mentioned, this webinar will be recorded and shared in a follow-up email, and the agenda is on the slide. Please save your questions for the sessions held after the presentations. Today's webcast is hosted by the Eastern Lake Ontario Swallow-wort Collaborative, or ELOSC, a stakeholder-driven network that links people, information, and action through enhanced communication. The ELOSC serves as a platform where different stakeholder groups can share research and best management practices to enhance the management and spread prevention of swallow-wort. Current ELOSC collaborators are shown on the slide, and any stakeholders that embrace this effort are invited to become a collaborator. Joining the ELOSC is very informal, no papers to sign, just a willingness to share information. Please just contact Robert Smith to collaborate. The ELOSC is hosted by the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, or SLELO PRISM. SLELO PRISM is one of 8 PRISMs that span the state of New York State, forming a network that serves as an integrative approach to invasive species management. The PRISM network is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund in coordination between the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and various host organizations. The main purpose of the PRISM network is to coordinate invasive species management functions to minimize the harm caused by invasive species on New York's environment, economy, and human health. SLELO PRISM is hosted by the Nature Conservancy and encompasses the 5 counties of Oneida, Oswego, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence. And we work closely with our partners to protect our lands and waters from the impacts of invasive species. Okay, and I'm going to see if our first guest speaker has arrived. Anybody see Josh? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to our speaker, Spencer Busler with the Thousand Islands Land Trust, who is going to share their swallow-wort management efforts. Spencer, feel free to share your screen when ready.
Very good. Will do, Megan. Thanks for the opportunity. Pull this up here. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yep, I see slides not in presentation mode, just PowerPoint mode.
How about
There
that?
you go. Now you're good.
Bingo. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Spencer Busler. I'm the Associate Director for the Thousand Islands Land Trust. We are a nonprofit land conservation organization that operates from the eastern end of Lake Ontario through the northern extent of St. Lawrence County, primarily focusing in the St. Lawrence River Valley and the lower watersheds that feed the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario. And we conserve about 15,000 acres of land over the last 40 years. We've conserved that through conservation easements on private lands, which accounts for about 6,000 acres, as well as about 9,000 acres that we own and manage outright for various conservation purposes. Some of that being, outdoor recreation, water quality improvement, ecological conservation, and things of that nature. And really, when it comes to swallow-wort, we really started cutting our teeth on this back in 2010 when our current executive director was doing some easement monitoring on Carlton Island in Cape Vincent, and he came across this plant that just didn't look like the rest of the plants. And so, through a really strong outreach initiative, we were able to really gather the troops and spread the awareness of this invasive plant that had seemed to overtake quite a bit of the island. I forget the exact acreage that had infested on Carlton Island to begin with, but management started in 2012 and 2013. And I want to give a special thanks to Mike and Eileen Comerford and the rest of the Carlton Island residents that have been supportive and really critical in advancing the swallow-wort management and treatment on that particular island. We're excited to say we've reduced the densities and the presence by 85 to 90% on that island. Obviously, it ebbs and flows with active management, but it really is one of the better success stories that we've seen, but it's never ending. We always have to stay vigilant and press forward. It is, swallow-wort's one of those things that it can be somewhat disheartening because as soon as you think you have a grip on it, you look over your shoulder and there it is again. I was down in the Finger Lakes for a wedding earlier this year, and I look in the garden bed of the hotel I was staying at, and of course there was some swallow-wort in this garden bed of the hotel. And fortunately, the hotel managers didn't yell at me for pulling it. But it seems to follow me everywhere I go, despite the efforts to try to eradicate and I think it takes continued adaptive management and persistence to stay up on top of it and to really ensure that we are having a meaningful impact and focusing our conservation and eradication efforts where they have the most impact. So we want to protect those areas that are highly sensitive from an ecological standpoint, and safeguard those properties from invasives like this. So we've got a little bit of history starting back in 2010. I won't go too much more into detail on this particular project because the recording is up on the Eastern Lake Ontario Swallow-wort Collaborative webpage. All the recordings, I believe, are recorded there, right, Megan? So I'd highly recommend checking out that webpage and watching the older recordings. But I will share some of the highlights, the lessons learned here. It's really our playbook, and this was developed over the course of that decade and a half with the landowners and really a trial and error in some instances, and it is a major lift. It's an effort. That does entail utilizing equipment, sprayers, chemicals, and mechanical removal. You'd really need to have the 1, 2, 3 punch in order to stay up on top of this plant. And so any time we have a large and dense infestation of a half acre or more, I'd say maybe even a quarter acre or more, having some sort of broadcast spraying capability is really critical. And so that could be either an ATV mounted, a tow behind, some sort of tractor mount. That really makes knocking the dense infestation back at the onset. It really is a great tactic to start off with. And it's likely that you're going to have to stay up on that broadcast. It may not just be one broadcast, but it may be several broadcast sprays. And really, the mechanism that we found that works best with Carlton Island and other areas that we've implemented management on is a spray mow spray regime, where we spray the plants early in the spring. Now, obviously, if there is a dense mat of the plant, a huge dense infestation, and we spray, we want to make sure that we're not just spraying the top of the blanket. So in some instances, it does make sense to knock back with a mowing to begin with and let the plants reemerge if you're starting from a very dense carpet of swallowwort. If not, then that early May to mid-May initial inspection, followed by a spray, maybe in the first week of June, uh, followed back up with another mowing in the middle of the summer, followed by a spot spray later in that summer season. So timing is incredibly important with any of these management activities. As you know, this summer was a relatively dry summer, and so plants were evolving at a different rate than we're typically used to seeing. So being able to adjust schedules and treat as needed, that's really critical because you don't want to be too late and have your spray be worthless because the seeds are already dispersed or something like that. So these are just general guidelines that we found to be somewhat successful. And I think it's important to note that once you're done with this relatively intensive management regime, that you should reseed any of the bare patches or open grounds just because it's a fresh scar. And so those nice downy seeds spread way too easily. But now I wanted to speak more about the conservation initiative that we have going on at Tibbetts Point. Tibbetts Point is right at where the confluence of Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. It's beautiful, beautiful area. If you haven't seen a Tibbetts Point sunset yet, I highly recommend it. But it is an area of incredible ecological value, and we see a lot of rare and threatened species, bird species in particular, that utilize this area for breeding and feeding and wintering. And so originally we had the land trust had conserved about a 50 or 60 acre piece on Tibbetts Point in the mid early 90s, I'll say. And then over the last, I want to say 5 years, we've worked to expand that original 50 acre conservation property to a property that's about 350 acres of contiguous conserved lands. And I did see Mary Misek on the call list earlier, so I just want to give a shout out to Mary for working with us to conserve a critical portion of that main preserve. And it's a great, great spot because it has undeveloped shoreline. We have open grasslands that I'll tell you more about. We have some mature forests. We have some early successional fields and shrublands. So it's a nice diversity that's servicing those rare and threatened species. But a lot of them are dependent on grasslands and are there because of the quality of grasslands. The southern portion of that property is known as the Schmeer Preserve. And this is a larger crop field. It was all corn and soybean prior to our ownership, tilled, regularly fertilized, and herbicide applied. So it was a nice blank slate to start from. We acquired it and worked with SLELO PRISM and the Cornell Sea Grant and a number of other agencies and funding agencies to seed the grassland property with a native upland meadow mix. And it really did come in nicely. You'll see the photo on the bottom here. The area on the left was left unseeded. The area on the right was seeded. So there's a lot of nice pollinator species with relatively local ecotypes involved. On the north end of the property, though, north of the original Tibbetts Point Preserve, we had a serious infestation of pale swallow-wort. And not only that, it was coupled up with a highly dense shrubland, which you see in the background here, where my cursor is. And so we had all of this swallow-wort just upwind of this incredibly dense shrubland. So you're getting an area that is almost impossible to access. And you're getting these swallow-wort plants that are starting to grow in. You can see it here where my cursor is now, growing in, climbing up the buckthorn and honeysuckle, and using that as structural support to release its seeds higher up into the wind, helping the spread of the plant. So we thought that, that in order for us to be effective in managing that, we need to be able to get in and access the property where that infestation really had begun. And 2 years ago, we had received a special grants award from SLELO PRISM to actually go in and inventory exactly what sort of swallow-wort infestation and other invasive infestation we were dealing with to see the extent of management that would be required. And as you can see here, the green dots are individual swallow-wort presence coupled with, buckthorn and other invasives. So we got a good handle on the quantity and presence density. So the next step was to actually go in and do some shrubland removal. And this entailed quite a bit of mowing, both with a tractor mounted brush hog, rotary cutter, but also on the right, you'll see it. We had a skid steer mounted with a FECON unit, which is a forestry mulcher head that allowed us to go in and actually strip all of that woody vegetation down to the bare ground so that we could start from scratch here, open this back up to a native meadow or native grassland ultimately is the goal here. And so we used quite a bit of technology throughout this process in 2024. We used a nice piece of software called Drone Deploy that allowed us to fly a pattern taking downward aerial images of the management site, and it stitches those together to create almost a real-time ortho image so that as the operator in the FECON unit was driving, we could say, no, the swallow-wort infestation is about 50 yards to your north. You have to push into that brush, and it helps guide management almost real time. So incredibly handy to have that sort of technology at your disposal. But as you can see, we've really gone in and opened up a lot of this area that was infested so that we can get in there and manage it both chemically and manage swallow-wort chemically and mechanically moving forward as we need to. And just a side by side using that drone deploy software. And again, once you go in and create that larger scar, having a seed base there of natives to come back up is incredibly important. So we did reseed this with a seed mix from Ernst Seed Company. Included a big blue stem, some Indian grass, switchgrass, Virginia wild rye, and a lot of this was frost seeded earlier this spring. And it was, I don't know if any of you were partaking in frost seeding this year, but it was a perfect year for frost seeding, just given the amount of cold weather, warm spells, rain timing, it all worked very well. And we're seeing good success. Now, when we do go in and manage and spray, we'll be certain to utilize chemical that is specific to broadleafs, something like a 2,4-D triclopyr, something like that, that really isn't going to affect the grass species, but it is really targeted to any swallow-wort or buckthorn that will be either suckering or reseeding or resprouting there. So we've got a whole lot of work left in front of us, but this was a really good first stab, and we're following that work plan that we used on Carlton Island to be most effective with the work that we have. So again, we've got certified applicators lined up to continue spraying out in that area. We're not going to slow down any. You can't take the pedal or your foot off the pedal when it comes to swallow-wort. And so it's a constant cycle of evaluating and managing and adapting. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing this cropping up on a number of different islands. So Carlton Island being one, but now we're seeing it on Grindstone Island. We're seeing it on Picton Island and Wellesley Island. And so, these islands are incredibly important ecologically because they are disconnected from mainland. So you would be hopeful that the invasives aren't as accessible there, but they've reached the islands, and we want to do what we can to protect those ecologically sensitive places. I think that's all I have, Megan. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'll
Oh, you're
stop
perfect.
there. Okay.
Thank you so much, Spencer. And again, we will have time at the end for questions. So I saw that Josh came on. Josh, are you available?
I am here. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you. Welcome, Josh. Thank you for joining us today. Josh is here with the Thousand Islands National Park of Canada, and they're actually going to share some of the work that the park has been doing and some work that they would like to do out on Duck Island. So feel free to share your screen when ready, Josh.
Sounds good. Let's get that up. Okay. Seeing that okay?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Had to full screen it so I can't see anyone, but yeah, thanks for having me. This is great. And that last presentation, I didn't realize where Tibbetts Point was, and then you started mentioning Grindstone. I looked at a map, and all those areas are kind of adjacent to the areas where we are in Thousand Islands National Park, and we're just starting to have an influx of, we tend to call it dog strangling vine, pale swallow-wort, same thing, having an influx. So that it's interesting to see that same thing on the other side. And obviously, they're probably seeds are moving freely between them. But Thousand Islands National Park is located in Thousand Islands. You can see the lime green boundary in there. It used to be called St. Lawrence Islands National Park. So we're a growing park. We've doubled in size over the last 10 years, which is great. Some really significant conservation lands. But we're scattered sort of from Brockville on the Canadian side, all the way down to Kingston. And I'm not sure what the adjacent American cities would be or towns would be, but that's you can see it in the map there. So very, very fragmented park. And I'll keep referring to this circle area out there, the Galoo Duck Islands. I'll talk about that at the end. That's also part of the park. Here's just a quick shot of the typical Thousand Islands. And I like to show this picture because the islands that the bridge is going over, those are both national park islands, but a lot of the smaller islands adjacent to it are private. Sometimes we own the whole island, sometimes we only own part of it. So obviously for invasive species management, we've got tons of private lands adjacent, and we've got to work with landowners even on the islands we're on sometimes. So park owns about 23 islands, some quite small, some over 8 kilometers long. So big mix of properties for sure. And just background, another reason this area is so important is just it's right kind of in the pinch point of this internationally significant wildlife movement corridor. So we're always kind of working in that context too, and trying to maintain connections and habitats that are suitable for plants and animals to move through. Very rich area. The past speaker mentioned probably a similar kind of thing. Just these islands sort of serve as a microclimate, right in a transitioning ecozone. So a lot of species that occur nowhere else in Canada, and only in the U.S. and sometimes not many places in the U.S. occur in the Thousand Islands. We have some plant populations and bird populations that are still healthy in the area, but aren't healthy anywhere else in the core of the range. So a pretty significant area. Another, just not going to go through all this, but impacts of something like the swallow-wort are really significant because we just have such a sensitive area with so much diversity that gets wiped out pretty quickly when swallow-wort moves in. So moving on to swallow-wort specifically, you can see in this map, all the red dots are the current distribution of swallow-wort in the park. There's certainly areas outside of those green boundaries where there is some swallow-wort as well. If you move down to Toronto, it's like dandelions down there in some parts of the city, and you can see it sort of starting to creep in along the major highway, 401, towards the park. So it's certainly coming in greater numbers, but you can see it's not totally widespread throughout the park yet. There's just pockets that show up on some of the islands. The first invasion we had outside of Main Duck, which is at the very bottom left of the screen. Not sure if you can see my cursor or not, but that's Main Duck. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the first observations that showed up in the park was Hill Island, right beside Wellesley Island. About 15 years ago, we had a private landowner, one of these islands where we own about 80%. Private landowner came to us and pointed it out. Unfortunately, it was really bad on his property already. And, between roads that run through the park and corridors, it spread pretty quickly. So it's now very well established on Hill Island, which has some really significant plant and wildlife attributes there. Things like really important snake hibernacula, pitch pine. It's one of the only places in Canada that occurs, and it's the largest stand in the country. So lots of sensitivities in there. Since then, it's started to poke up, like some of the observations you're seeing here, like the top right here. That was just a few plants that we were able to capture. In other places, it's spread pretty quickly, and it tends to be the worst in areas adjacent to the U.S. islands. That seems to be where it spreads in, and my suspicion, and kind of hearing from the past speaker here, it sounds like I was right to suspect it, as there is some strong invasions already on some of the U.S. islands that are spreading over. And the other thing that seems to influence them is islands where we have high deer populations. I'll talk about that briefly, but we do have a few islands with real hyperabundant deer, and those islands seem to be invaded much more quickly. And the only other factor we've really noticed for dog stringing vine and other invasive species is, we can go back in the imagery we have from 1924 and see areas that have remained forested that whole time. A lot of the area in the park is forested now, but was pastures and other things in the 20s. Those areas that have a historical disturbance that have not been forest, with the exception of some logging, have remained natural the whole time. Those areas that have had any kind of impact or pasteurization, that's the wrong word, sorry, that have had pastures on them, they seem to get invaded a lot more quickly. Whereas the patches in the park where there's never been any kind of agriculture or development, they seem to hold out for a lot of invasions, which is kind of just an interesting thing and something we consider when we're prioritizing which ones to tackle. So just quickly, a few facts. So like I say here, we have too many invasions, not just of the swallow-wort, but all kinds of other stuff showing up in the park. We have a prioritization matrix we use to try and decide which ones we have to hit, and then kind of go from there, which ones we'd like to tackle as resources come up. But we can't possibly get to all the invasions anymore. So unfortunately, we're just having to prioritize some and leave others, which is difficult, but necessary at this point. We definitely consider the unique island nature of the park, and that early invasions are always our priority, but especially on islands that are completely enclosed within the national park. If we can keep those areas clear, there's a better chance of them not being reinvaded. So trying to keep some of our islands sort of invasive free. But we have invasions creeping in, as I mentioned, from all around the park. It's tough to keep track of them. It's phenomenal how fast they're coming, them and other invasives as well. Other threats that we're really struggling with is, I mentioned the hyperabundant deer. They're wiping out the understory. We're just not getting tree regeneration at all. So I've been at the park for about 20 years now. Got some pretty big concerns is if those forests don't regenerate, those forests are still mature now, but if those trees start to come down and they're not being replaced, or we have, in places these tree pests like emerald ash borer wiping out stands, we're worried about hemlock woolly adelgid creeping into. Once those stands open up, they're just ripe for invasions from dog strangling vine, whereas now we sort of have chunks of the park they don't seem to want to get into. So that's a big concern. So I just put, like for a lot of our sites, I don't see us getting enough resources to tackle all this. We're really keen for there to be a broader solution like a biological control, as I'm sure lots of people are. So on that note, just shifting to Main Duck Island, I'm just going to flip back 2 slides so you can see the context again. Bottom left of the screen, way out in Lake Ontario, a long way from the US or Canadian mainland, is Main Duck Island and Yorkshire Island. And that's it. Look at it here. So it's about almost 4 kilometers long, and at this widest point, about 2 kilometers wide. So it's a pretty large island. It's got a really fascinating and diverse history, but while it's a national park, completely a national park now, it has been used in the past for a fishing village. There's been all kinds of grazing out there, all kinds of crazy things. There's been bison out there at times, and fenced in white-tailed deer and all kinds of stuff over the years. It's pretty interesting. It was owned by I don't know if it was the vice president, I forget now, apologize, of the US for quite a while before he donated it. So it's got a pretty diverse history, as I said. Well, why I'm talking about that is it's not a pristine area. It's certainly had lots of impacts over the years, and even though the park's now had it for 30-35 years, anywhere where there's not a little bit of forest left is completely covered in swallow-wort now. And you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see the lighter areas through the middle of the island. Those are all dog strangling vine. Anywhere where there's not kind of a shrub thicket or a small amount of forest, which there's very little left of in the island. Similar to the past presenters kind of islands, I'm thinking, with these kind of open patches. The smaller island to the right, that's Yorkshire Island, it still has a fair bit of forest, but it's, you know, being that close to Main Duck Island, wherever there's a bit of light, dog strangling vines creeping in. There's some really unique species on this island, plants like goosefoot corn salad that are found nowhere else in Canada, um, and some rare lichens and some pretty neat species that we're finding and doing some genetic testing on, and finding out that they're at the very least a subspecies. They could even be genetically distinct. So we know there's some really neat stuff happening out there. And some of those plants are really at risk to with the pale swallow-wort moving in and completely wiping them out. Here's a look at what those fields look like. And this was actually a picture from about 10 years ago. It's even denser now, pretty much just pure dog strangling vine through big tracts of the island. So we're at the point that it was really fascinating listening to the past speaker of some of those approaches. That's what it would take, but it's, you know, fields like this are just kilometers and kilometers of it. Every inch is covered in dog strangling vine. We're sort of at the point where we know we can't tackle that, and the amount of effort for us to tackle it compared to all the other earlier invasions in other parts of the park are becoming our priorities. But I was talking with Megan when we first sort of talked about me maybe presenting here. We'd really like to use this island because of its isolation. It's all national park. There's just massive tracts of the dog strangling vine as a possible site for a biocontrol test. And I've kind of been starting to reach out over the last 6 months to find out where that's at. I know earlier it was struggling a bit from what I heard in terms of the survivorship of the moths and their ability to fly, but I honestly haven't heard very much for a while. So just putting it out that this is a great site. We'd love to kind of partner with someone if they wanted to test one of those biological controls and see if that can open up the habitat a little bit and remove some of the dog strangling vine out there. So I'll leave it at that. Pretty quick overview, but there's my contact information, and I'm happy to chat with anyone about it. We've got lots small and large stands that we're trying to manage best we can.
Thank you so much, Josh. And this is a perfect segue because we will be discussing biocontrols coming up next here. Uh, so I would like to invite our next speaker, Robert Smith, who is our terrestrial restoration and resiliency coordinator with SLELO PRISM, and he's going to give updates on our efforts, including the biocontrol, monitoring surveys, volunteer engagement, and our removal efforts.
You're muted there, Robert.
Josh, you can turn your video off, and Robert, when you get a moment, you can turn your video on. And if you're trying to speak, I believe you are muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. I made you a co-host too.
Yes, excellent, because it was literally come up with a little message saying host won't let you unmute.
Yep,
So
we gotcha.
thank
Thank you,
you.
Robert.
Perfect. All right, let me start this all over again. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'd like to give you an update of the SLELO PRISM swallow-wort management efforts. This will include swallow-wort surveys, chemical treatments, manual mechanical treatments, and biocontrol, including establishment surveys. All right, perfect. All right. Each year, SLELO PRISM staff survey a few of our priority conservation areas, which are areas that SLELO PRISM and its partners select for their high ecological importance. This year, we visited 7 terrestrial PCAs, which you can see listed above. Results of these surveys found 6 of the 7 PCAs had swallow-wort present. The most swallow-wort was found on the Ontario Bay Initiative, or OBI, their couch easement, where 11 sites were marked off as having swallow-wort. The least found was on the Tug Hill, where we didn't find any swallow-wort in the 40 sites we visited. Now, before you get the wrong idea, this does not mean that the swallow-wort is absent on the Tug Hill Plateau, because it's definitely been found on they're found there. But it does indicate that it occurs less frequently than other areas of SLELO prism. Population of swallowwort ranged in size from 38.4 square feet to 3.05 acres, with densities varying from less than 5% to over 75% or a monoculture. These sites are visited on a 2-year cycle, so all these sites you see here, we will visit them again in 2027. All right. Chemical treatment of pale swallowwort. We use an integrated pest management system at SLELO Prism, using chemical, manual, mechanical, and biocontrol methods to suppress the population of swallowwort in our area. Our chemical treatments are provided by a contract herbicide applicator who we send out to multiple PCAs to apply herbicide to the swallowwort and multiple other invasive species. In 2025, they visited 11 PCAs to spray herbicides, specifically triclopyr on the swallowwort. The greatest number of sites that they sprayed at was at Chameau Barrens with 18 sites, while the largest area they went to for spraying was on Carlton Island, 16.3 acres. Densities vary from scattered, less than 5%, to monoculture. When possible, the staff and our volunteers will be tasked to manage the smaller sites. Manual mechanical treatment of swallowwort. Over the last few years, our volunteer hand pulls have been a great success. These sites are typically smaller with less dense population than the ones handled by the herbicide applicator, but I feel that they are just as important and have been shown to be quite effective in reducing the swallowwort population at these sites. In fact, at one site we've been working on, it's also a restoration area, so we're following up the hand pulls with restoration plantings. Hand pulls also occur during our surveys when we find an isolated small population that would be, well, really inconvenient for anyone to go back to. So while we're there, we take care of it. The last management effort that I want to talk about is biocontrol, and basically it's all going to be linked with the establishment surveys for the rest of the presentation. Specific biocontrol is Hypena opulenta, is the biocontrol that was used for several years and defoliates swallowwort when it's in its larval stage. We have been involved with the swallowwort biocontrol program since 2018 when we set up 2 cages at Whaley State Park. We continued setting up those 2 cages and releasing Hypena larvae through 2024. In 2020, we set up 1 cage at Grenadier Island and 1 cage at Carlton Island. Unfortunately, no adult moths emerged from the pupae placed in those cages. In 2021, we moved the 1 cage that was on Carlton Island to Grenadier Island, increasing the number of cages on that island to 2. This move was due to the real successful management that has been occurring on Carlton Island. From 2021 to 2024, larvae were released from the cages on Grenadier Island. Give you a little history of Hypena, more history about the Hypena opulenta releases. The method we used each year was to place 20 to 40 Hypena opulenta moths, either adults or pupae, into the cages in late May or early June, depending on the location and year. These came from either the New York Invasive Species Research Institute or NISRI. We had other ones come from the USDA and we also purchased from the Philip Lampe Beneficial Insect Rearing Laboratory in New Jersey. We would monitor the cages weekly from June to August, recording the presence of the hypena of any life stage and the amount of swallow-wort defoliation that had occurred in the cages. When the swallow-wort in the cage was over 50% defoliated, we lift the cage up to allow the larvae to disperse. The cage was also lifted if the hypena were about to or had pupated already, or there just wasn't any activity for several weeks, which indicates that that new generation of hypena failed to emerge. Also in 2023 and 2024, we purchased a bunch of larvae and we just literally just released it outside of the cages. Hypena opulenta establishment survey. Starting in 2021, we conducted establishment surveys at Whaley State Park and Grenadier Island. Our initial survey method was according to instructions given by NISRI to search the areas around where the cages from the previous year had been set up, with a minimal distance of 2 meters around the former cage site. I went ahead and decided to go with 5 meters from the cage. This survey method continued until 2024, and unfortunately, no hypena or evidence of their presence was found. Not giving up so easily, I thought of other ways I could look for evidence of hypena establishment. One way that I came up with was a trail survey at Whaley State Park. This survey occurred between 2023 and 2025 and involved walking the entire trail system, which is between 10 to 15 miles. And we did it in a 3-month period. This was done by walking a third of the trail system each month for 3 months, June through August. On the trail, we had 2 surveyors, one on the left and one on the right, each looking from trail's edge to about 10 feet off the trail for Hypena opulenta or evidence of their presence. This survey greatly increased the amount of survey area being surveyed and took into account the mobility of the hypena after they emerged in the spring. In addition, the park staff also agreed to conduct the survey. So that doubled our survey size, but unfortunately, still no hypena opulenta were observed or evidence of their presence. Another thought I had was that my time was limited on Grenadier Island compared to the residents. So I decided to create an identification poster and distribute it to the residents of the island. This would be a community science survey. My request was that that the residents be on the lookout for evidence of hypena around their property and when they're moving around the island. The residents I talked to seemed enthusiastic about it and wanted to participate, and all they had to do was send me a picture of the evidence they found. Unfortunately, no one contacted me or sent me a picture. So once again, no evidence of hypena was found using this method. All right, given the lack of emails and pictures that I received from the residents of Grenadier Island, I decided that I was going to survey most of the island myself. This involved a transect survey. Our GIS analyst, Carolyn, was kind enough to create transects across the properties of the 2 largest landowners on the island, which can be seen clearly on the picture to the left. My goal was to walk as much of these transects as possible. Once each month from June to August of this year. As with the trail survey, I'd look for hypena or evidence within 10 feet either side of the transects. Also, I decided this would be a good opportunity to map out much of the swallow-wort presence across the island. This was done with IMAP Advanced and can be seen on the picture on the right. The green you see on the map indicated the presence of swallow-wort, while the purple indicated no detection. Which I was pleasantly surprised to find that there was actually areas on this island that didn't have swallow-wort. For the longest time, I believed that didn't occur. Unfortunately, I once again did not find hypena or evidence of their presence. So after very exhausting surveys using multiple methods, I found no evidence that hypena are establishing a population at Whaley State Park or Grenadier Island. So what are my next steps? Well, I intend to continue using the chemical and manual mechanical methods to manage swallow populations in SLELO PRISM, and I also will wait in eager anticipation of the next approved swallow-wort biocontrol I am allowed to release, which, that should be a good segue for David. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robert. I'd like to invite David Harris with SUNY ESF to share their updates on the biocontrol research that they've been involved in. Take it away, David.
Thank you so much. Let me get all my windows where I want them to be. Hi, everybody. My name is David Harris. I'm a PhD student at SUNY ESF down in Syracuse, New York. I'm working with Dr. Dylan Perry, and I've encountered a number of you, including, hi, Robert, a number of you at various conferences over the last several years. Is my slide visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. So my work has been focusing primarily on evaluating a potential new biocontrol agent for the two species of swallow-wort that are invasive in the United States and Canada. As you can see here, it's a beautiful beetle, kind of nice to look at. It's a particularly interesting project because it was looked at briefly in the very beginning stages of searching for biocontrol agents and then discounted, and then we sort of came back to it. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. There we go. As most of you are probably aware, there are actually two species of swallow-wort that are invasive in North America. And now, from what Spencer was just saying, it seems like there's also some genetic diversity stuff going on. So there may be other subspecies happening as well. Both of them came over to this continent in the early 19th century, were noted a little bit here and there, didn't really become invasive until, I'm going to say, the 90s. So present, and then something released them from not being a problem. Currently in North America, according to the iNaturalist, which is a pretty good gauge of where these things are, Vincetoxicum nigrum, which is the black swallowwort, more in the New England area, although it does spread out into the Midwest. I also did see that there were some positively confirmed populations all the way in a small town south of Vancouver. So it's made it to the other coast as well, which is something that's very concerning, and hopefully will put a little bit of fire underneath getting a new biocontrol agent out there. Rossicum, you're all very aware, very much in this southern Ontario, central New York, and then a little bit around there as well. So it's spreading out pretty nicely. The insect that we're looking at, no common name, which makes it a little difficult to refer to, but Chrysochus asclepiadeus. This is a leaf beetle in the Chrysomelidae family. Very beautiful to look at. And as you'll see over the next several slides, several dozen slides, pretty good at killing swallowwort. This beetle is of particular interest to us because both the adults and the larvae feed extensively on swallowwort. The adults above ground on the leaves, and when they're desperate, also the seed pods and the stems, and the larvae feed underground on the roots. Typically, it takes about 2 years to go from egg to adult, according to observations in their natural habitat, which is Europe. It is found across Europe and then potentially into Russia and China, although we think that there is a species complex, so they're not all identical, even though they look to the normal person's eye pretty similar. Originally, this was collected in eastern Ukraine, well, in Kiev, and then there were also some surveys done in eastern Ukraine, and this was way back in 2006. There was another population found in Switzerland, so those are pretty far apart. Subsequently, another population was discovered in France in 2008. This project has been going on long before I started, but I've been working with the European Biological Control Laboratory, which is a USDA facility in France, as well as CABI, which is an international NGO that does a lot of work in biocontrol, particularly with the biocontrol of weeds. The CABI folks in Switzerland, right about here, primarily started work with the Ukrainian beetles, and the French laboratory down on the coast focused primarily on the French beetles. This matters because later it was determined, these two populations are actually quite different from each other, and political things happened in Ukraine, which made it impossible to go back there to get more insects. So we had to then get rid of all the research we had already done with the Ukrainian beetles and move everything over and redo a bunch of stuff with the French ones. Most of you are probably somewhat familiar with how biocontrol agent testing works, but for those of you who aren't, a pretty quick overview is you have to determine that it's safe, that it's effective, and that it's logistically reasonable to use. In terms of determining that it's safe, there's a series of tests that you can run where you basically start with locking it in a cage with just one plant that's related to what you want it to eat and seeing if it eats it. If it doesn't, that's great. If it does, maybe a little bit risky. Then you lock it in a cage with two plants, the one that you want it to eat, so in our case, swallow-wort, and then the non-targets that are maybe related to swallow-wort. And then that will give you a little bit more information about how this insect might actually behave in the wild. And then there's a bunch of other types as well, and I'll cover some of those that have been done in Europe recently. Then you have to make sure that it actually kills the plant in a meaningful way, or at least reduces its ability to reproduce. We're doing our best with that in quarantine right now, as we do not yet have release permits for the US or Canada, but we're hoping to start that process soon. Yeah. So a long time ago, the very initial host tests were done in Europe in that French laboratory that I mentioned. They looked at all of these plants, some of them because they are related to swallow-wort, which is in the same group as milkweed. So that's a big thing for all of us here in North America. We're like, we better make sure that this thing doesn't attack milkweed, as well as some other plants that are often found in association. And based on those very initial tests in a laboratory setting in isolation, there was a very small amount of feeding on butterfly milkweed, so Asclepias tuberosa, by both the adults and the larvae, and then a tiny bit of feeding on the roots by the larvae for common milkweed. After 2 years, from 2008 to 2010, we decided we don't want to deal with this. This seems too risky. We have hypena. It looks great in the lab. We're going to focus all of our efforts on that. So this was sort of put down for a long time. And then a number of years later, quite a number of years, in 2018, these two papers came out. A researcher in Canada thought, wait a minute, there are two species of beetle in the same genus in North America that do feed on, naturally, they feed on dogbane for this one down here, and then one way out on the West Coast that feeds on milkweed. And she thought, well, what if we bring them into the lab, run them through the same tests that this guy was doing, and see if they do the same thing? So she did that. And what she found out was basically if you isolate an insect, including these two, in the lab on a plant that it doesn't normally eat, it will occasionally eat it. And that behavior is never observed among either of these two species in the actual environment. So this sort of reopened the possibility of looking at Chrysochus asclepiadeus, that beetle from Europe. That, plus the failure of hypena to establish, despite great effort, again, as Robert was sort of illustrating for us earlier, really made everybody who has been involved in this project think seriously about reapproaching Chrysochus as seriously as a potential biocontrol agent. As far as I know, hypena has successfully established and reproduced and persisted in one site in Canada. People have been releasing it in many parts of New England and New York. And to the best of my knowledge, as of last year at least, none of them have seen successful establishment, despite thousands and thousands of individuals being released. So, what that means is that we pick this back up. CABI, that international NGO, started up again with the French population of beetles. The French laboratory, the year after that, started in earnest, and then I joined in 2023. There have been a series of open field tests, which are very important over in Europe. I've been working on some rearing and phenology work to see exactly what it's doing while it's in the soil. We've done some adult no choice, although based on research coming from Lindsay Milbrath and then some others, the feeding on the leaves does not have a huge impact on its ability to reproduce over time, whereas feeding on the roots does. So adult feeding on swallow-wort may not have a huge impact, um, but still worth looking at. Larval no choice as well, where we basically put larvae in a pot with one plant in it. Same deal, adults and larvae, but actually giving them a choice between swallow-wort and something else, and then actually seeing what the effect on swallow-wort that this beetle has. In France, there was an open field test where pale swallow-wort, which is invasive in North America, white swallow-wort, which does occur in extremely small numbers, at least in Rhode Island, but is not considered invasive, um, but does occur in France, where this population was originally collected, and then common milkweed were all planted out in this area. Milkweed or common milkweed is already present in Europe and considered invasive there, so they were able to do this kind of research. And after planting these plants in the ground and then releasing Chrysochus in these gardens, and then observing over the course of several days, what we basically saw was if you put this beetle on milkweed and it's outside, it just leaves. It does not want to feed on it. Same here, similar results. Uh, if you plant milkweed in the ground where we collect these beetles, so we have a couple of field sites where there's large populations. These plants have been in the ground for, I think, 5 years now. And never once, even though we go to these sites every single year, have we seen any one iota of damage on them, even though it is smack in the middle of a huge population of these beetles. In the takeaway from these is basically with no choice outside, very, very low feeding and development on milkweed species, and relatively high development on its actual preferred host, which is swallow-wort. A very similar result with a different open field test in 2021. Feeding and survival on its host, no feeding or survival on milkweed. In Switzerland, the Cabby group did a similar project with white swallow-wort, swamp milkweed, common milkweed, and then dogbane, where they arranged these plants in a big old circle and released the beetles in the middle. This is an aerial photo of that in this circle and that they mowed in the grass. That's where that took place. The takeaway from this experiment was if you dump these beetles in the middle of a field with both milkweed and swallowwort, it doesn't go for the milkweed. It avoids it almost entirely. Which is good news for us. Later, doing some ongoing rearing work on black swallowwort. We wanted to get some numbers for its survival. It's relatively low, but this is normal for insects. They lay 1,000 eggs and 3 of them survive to adulthood. So approximately 5% survival and development on swallowwort. That's a good thing. Not huge numbers, but this is what we expected to see. And then when I did a similar project here, I got similar results. So when you throw the beetle on what it wants to eat, similar levels of survival. High hatch rate. So the eggs are very fecund, or the adults are very fecund. I counted over 11,000 eggs last year, and almost every single one of them successfully hatched into a larvae that started to feed. So we know that even if the larvae don't survive the entire winter, they are still feeding and doing damage to plants in the ground during at least the warm season. So even if only 5% of those survive to adults the following year or the year after that, there's still damage larger than that number happening underground. Yeah, similar results. I'm also trying to figure out a way to rear them in vitro, which basically just means in a lab and not in dirt. This is a little challenging because if you put them all together in one big pot, they eat each other. So they have to be isolated. But this has also allowed me to sort of see how quickly they develop and if there's any differences in development on the two species of invasive swallowwort. Um, these are just some photos of what they look like from the very first hatch. When they hatch out of an egg, we call that an instar. Every time it molts, it's the next number. So the second instar, it has molted once. The third instar, it has molted twice, etc. I actually caught one in the act of eating another larva, so like we know this happens. But I looked at a whole bunch of these this year, took lots and lots of measurements. Basically, it grows a little bit faster on Rossicum, which is pale swallowwort, and that's the one that's most prevalent where all of you are. Meaningfully faster? No. So there, it's approximately the same. Statistical significance is not the same as actual like importance. Uh, we also got a little bit of information about how long it takes for them to develop. So they're spending between 2 and 3 weeks in each stage. There's some difference based on what they're feeding upon, but again, statistical significance is not the same as meaningful significance. They're both going through about the same life cycle. Um, One interesting thing here is previously we thought they only had 5 instars, but it turns out if you keep feeding them, they just keep molting and getting bigger, which is a thing that beetles sometimes do. And this just shows that this is a little bit hard to look at. Don't spend too much time on it, but basically there is a range for how long a population will spend in any one instar. So at any given time in the summer after the eggs are laid by the adults, there might be larvae of many different stages coexisting in the soil, which is good for us because smaller larvae feed on the smaller roots, bigger larvae feed on the larger roots. Um, what does this mean for biocontrol? We're not sure yet. I don't know. I got a lot of slides. Sorry about that. We have been doing a lot of no choice testing as well. The way biocontrols are vetted, people who know things about plants decide on a list of things that are closely related to what you want to kill. And many years ago, this list was drawn up for swallow-wort. Obviously, there's a lot of milkweeds, but a whole bunch of plants in Apocynaceae, as well as some crops, as well as some things that are less and less related. Locking adults in cages with these plants, these are the only ones where we saw any amount of feeding. However, the first year we did this, we only had access to very small plants, and so if one adult takes an exploratory bite, then that could be significantly, 60% of the plant, but if it's only this tall, it doesn't mean much. So we redid some of these the following year. And some more species, none of which had any feeding at all. 5 out of the 26 that I tested had exploratory nibbling only, and none of the non-target species supported adults for more than 15 days. So most of them after 10 days, the adults were dead. A few of them after 15, it took 15 days. But that's good for us. That means that it's not going to be doing significant feeding on non-targets. However, because we know that the damage to roots is really more important than the damage to leaves, doing no-choice studies for these non-target species with larvae is more important. So these are the plants that we've looked at so far. Stuff that's faded out, there was no feeding whatsoever. The stuff on top, that's what we want them to eat. We know that they should, and they did in fact do it. There was some damage on the roots of these, which corroborates research that's been done elsewhere. And then kind of significant damage with no choice on swamp milkweed. And this was sort of a big red flag for us. And so we have decided to focus our one choice testing with swamp milkweed in particular. I still have to do some work on looking at overlaps of populations between swamp milkweed and the swallow-wort species, because swamp is in more wet areas, swallow-wort somewhat less so, but that has to be done still. More species that we tested. No feeding on the roots whatsoever. More species, no feeding. So we've done quite a lot of work trying to vet this to make sure that it's safe so that we can prepare for our release petition. Only 5 of the 44 species we've looked at supported larval development at all, and only 2 had any adults come out. Very low percentages, but again, this Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed, this is still more than we want to see, so we are working on choice tests now that will take some time before I have results. Just to sort of illustrate what some of these tests look like, literally 2 pots with 2 plants in a cage. And you can see in these, on the left, this plant with no leaves on it, that's the swallow-wort. The plant on the right, this is swamp milkweed, no feeding whatsoever, even after they had totally defoliated the swallow-wort. Similar story here. They hadn't quite finished this one, but on the right is swamp milkweed, no feeding whatsoever. And then when at the end of the study, the 3 plants on the left, they were in one pot, almost no feeding at all. The 1 plant on the right is what was left of a mature black swallow-wort plant. And this is the results that we saw for almost all of our adult one-choice trials. Currently, we are in the midst of doing the larval one-choice studies. They take a long time. I will be looking at the roots of all of the permutations of these in January and then again in July. So I give them 6 months to do some feeding. You don't want to do too much observation because it involves dumping the whole plant out and sifting through it and then carefully putting it all back in, and too much handling can have effects on their development. So I will let you guys know as soon as I have information. But sort of to show how it's going, I was able to get a hold of some larger bottle gentian plants, which was one of the ones that were of concern last year. And they are still actively trying to flower in my greenhouse. And this is co-potted. So there is a swallow-wort also planted in this pot, which is like probably totally dead. And they don't seem to be affecting this. It doesn't look so good because there's not getting enough light at this time of year, but they are growing. Uh, oh yeah. So seems to be pretty safe. We're paying special attention to swamp milkweed. Is it effective? Mostly yes. For the target impact studies that we've done so far, more larvae on a plant, less plant left at the end of the study period. This is a single plant when I started, lots of beautiful, healthy swallowwort roots. I added 10 larvae to it. 6 months later, almost all of those roots had been shorn off, and there was just this tiny bit of crown left. And then 6 months after that, this was totally dead, and there were these tiny little fragments left in the pot. And I saw this pattern with most of the plants that received 10 or 20 larvae. This is a lot of graphs. All that you really need to know is the more larvae you add, the less growth you see. And the 2 species of swallowwort seem to respond a little bit differently to having large numbers of larvae on them. But, and again, more graphs. Don't look too closely at them. These slides will be available if you do care. There's also a lot less growth in the roots. So significant loss in root biomass if you add more larvae. And these beetles are very fecund. Every adult female can lay between 75 to 125 eggs, most of which hatch. So this is a good thing. Also, it's not the same number of plants at the beginning and the end because a whole bunch of them died, which is what we wanted to see. Basically, the dark green is the very beginning. So this is 3 different species of swallowwort. These 2 are invasive, and this one I used as a control. The medium green is after 3 months, and then the light green is after 12 months. And the more larvae you add, the more plants die because they cut off all those roots and then feed on whatever they can find, and the plant simply doesn't have the ability to catch up. And this is also good news. So we're concerned about swamp milkweed. It is physiologically able to develop at very low numbers on this plant, but the adults in the one-choice tests demonstrate lack of interest. We're waiting to see what the larvae have to say in their one-choice trials. And when they had an open field test over in Switzerland, the folks at Cabby, this plant was available when they released the beetles in the open and they were not touched at all. So those are all promising signs. Next, we got to continue these one choice studies. I'm going to try to put together a version of an open garden test in quarantine. I don't have lots and lots of space, so it's a little bit challenging. Um, and then we have started the process of putting together our petition for the USDA. And I've been in talks with Rob Boucher in Canada a little bit because we may also try to pursue a release petition in Canada, but I have not actually started that process yet. Um, but yeah, so that's where we are with Chrysochus asclepiadeus. I think that it is a pretty promising potential biocontrol agent, and if all goes well over the next 6 to 8 months in terms of the one choice trials, I think that we have a pretty good chance of getting permission for release, at least in Canada. I've been told that it is generally easier to do it than it is in the US and at least faster. So stay tuned.
Thank you for sharing, David. Very interesting research that you're doing. We appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry for the long-winded nature. It's a lot of stuff.
Oh, no, you were perfect on time. Thank you so much. Before we run into the Q&A session, I do have a very brief poll that I'd like everyone to participate in. So I'm just going to launch that and leave it up for a few minutes for you to participate, and then we'll go into the Q&A session and also the open discussion. Let me know if you're seeing a poll. David, do you see it? Oh, you're muted.
A poll has popped up, but I don't know how to actually engage with it.
Interesting. I'm getting a thumbs up from Rachel.
Maybe because I'm a co-host.
I can.
Same, David. I was experiencing the same thing. I can't respond to it, but I think it's because we're co-hosts.
Yeah, I think we're getting a different screen, I think, because we're co-hosting.
Yeah, maybe you guys don't need to worry about it as the co-hosts. So that's okay. You can just hang tight for a minute. If you want, you can look in the chat and see if anybody's asked any questions. I've only seen a couple questions.
With regards to goats eating swallow-wort, Jillian Cooper, anecdotally at least, and I know these are not the same animals as goats, but I collect my beetles in sheep and cow pastures in eastern France, and this swallow-wort is always completely untouched in those pastures. And because it is in Apocynaceae and it's related to milkweeds, it is mildly toxic. I don't know what the exact toxicity is for mammals and for goats in particular, but that may help answer your question.
Yeah, that makes me think. When I was doing the surveys at Whaley, there's also like a considerable amount of buckthorn and honeysuckle, and whenever my eye would get caught for something that was defoliated, it was buckthorn and honeysuckle. Never swallowwort. So, so even buckthorn and honeysuckle, which not very many things want to touch, something will nibble at them, and nothing seems to nibble at swallowwort.
Actually, I said that, and I think I did see goats in one of my other sites, and they had not eaten any as well. I
Yeah,
have some pictures of them.
if they did, the one issue you have with goats is they can be very non-specific, so if they'll go after everything, and if you have an area that has some swallowwort but also has some plants of value to you, or just a rare species, they're going to eat that too. In fact, they might eat that over the swallowwort.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Thank you to those who have taken it. And if anybody wants to come off mute and ask their questions for the presenters now, you're welcome to, or you can continue to use the chat. We'll have a few more minutes of just questions, and then we will go into the open engagement where folks can share their swallow-wort management issues or successes. Feel free to come off mute. I believe everybody has the ability to do that anyway. We do have some questions in the chat. Leslie was mentioning that swallow-wort is growing on their property in white cedar and Scotch pine forests and no light, and the white cedar forest has never been farmed. I'm not sure what the question there is. Someone's asking about any observations on powdery mildew impacts.
No, I
I
can't
haven't seen
address
powdery
that.
mildew, but there are a number of other foliar fungal diseases that have no impact on its ability to reproduce, but they do cause premature leaf falling off. But I don't know about powdery mildew in particular.
Some folks are really interested in tarping. I know that
Yeah.
I had emailed you about this a few days ago, Spencer. If anybody
I,
has anything to add about tarping, we've got some folks interested in that, if it's an
no,
effective.
I haven't tried tarping. It's of interest to me to they're not to try some tarping with some invasive species, if not necessarily swallowwort, but I could consider that. But I haven't. So if anybody's out there trying it, there and it's like they're and they find a period of time that they're showing effectiveness in tarping, please bring that back to me because I'll I can then share it with others.
And Luke, in my collection sites where it's native, the swallow-worts that they're feeding on naturally, they're occurring in really highly biodiverse fields and pastures. I would say that swallow-wort is less than 1% of the stems there. And it's a relatively small site, so even at a site that's less than an acre, I'm still able to easily collect 200 to 300 beetles showing up one random day in July. So I don't think that super high density is required to maintain populations. They have lots of underground material to feed on.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. If folks would like to come off mute, we have some time for those of you who are interested to take 1 or 2 minutes to just share your swallow-wort management challenges or successes as sort of a networking session. Um, Everyone should have the ability to come off of mute because I set it as so. Or if nobody has interest in this part, that's also fine.
No, I could briefly go back to goats because I saw lots of things on goats. I just know that they're very non-specific, and if you have an area that says, say, you have a near monoculture of swallowwort, then and if the goats will eat it, more power to the goats on that. I'm hesitant about having that be a one thing fixes all solution because of its non-selectivity, and it will devour anything in that area. And if you have plants of native plants and mixed in with swallowwort, it's going to eat those all up too. And the swallowwort might actually recover better than them. So it's like that. You might actually get a negative response to the goats, so I would just caution as to um, what the situation on the ground is before considering goats.
And
And I think
Judy put, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that that actually connects very well with something that Spencer talked about a little bit, which is whenever you do anything, always to get rid of it, whether it's physical removal or goats or mowing or herbicide, overseed it with native stuff. Can't stress that
Absolutely.
enough.
Absolutely.
And to that point, Robert, I think that should be reiterated that these are highly invasive plants. They rebound so quickly. And so
Yes.
after some sort of mechanical treatment or chemical treatment, they're likely the first ones to pop up. So if you're looking for a quick survey to get an understanding of presence or density, don't wait too long after the initial treatment to look again because they're aggressive.
Mhm.
Very aggressive, and we found them very tricky to manage for. That's why we're really looking for that biocontrol because I like to call it compare it to whack-a-mole. Because we survey for the swallow-wort and we try to there mark every place we can find it, but we don't survey every corner of every inch of the land. And so if it shows up in other places, there it'll successfully seed. The seeds will go up into the air and they'll just land in random spots there, sometimes in the area that you managed for. So it doesn't, so it looks like you didn't manage, yet you did.
Mhm. I
So,
dropped I don't know if everybody saw, I dropped a link to a really thorough, if a bit dense, very recent paper talking about the biology of swallowwort that was published 2 years ago by some of the like big names in swallowwort research. And it's open source, so everybody should be able to read that. And I can give that link to Megan too if anybody cares to look at it
Yeah, any
later.
resources that you have, if you give them to me, maybe email them to me today, because I'll be putting the follow-up email together and I can send it out to everybody. Folks are asking about the best way to dispose of the seed pods. They need to be bagged and solarized, I would presume.
I
Robert,
was
do
going
you
to
have
say,
anything else to add?
I was just, I thought you'd be able to take that one. It's like, yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's
but
what
I
we
just
do. We bag them up. In fact, Megan does most of the manual removal with volunteer work for SLELO Prism. So she's got actually the most experience with bagging up swallowwort. But that's what we do. We'll bag it up, roots, all pods, everything, and then sit it out in the sun. We sit out in the sun for months until it's non-recognizable. Then you can dispose of it.
I also really like that our Canadian counterparts lean on the dog strangling vine common name because I think in the US it needs a full rebranding with more of a punch than pale swallowwort. And so if we can get a rebranding of it to give it more of a of a punch, then we should do so.
It's a good point. And Sally was sharing that their best success has been a combination of deep digging, tarping, and spot spraying.
Hmm.
And they're just trying to determine, when to take the tarps off. I guess when things look dead would be my
That
guess.
that would be my recommendation. If I were to tarp, it's like I would tarp it probably for the year. They're lifted up for there next year to see if anything there pops up. If it does, put it right back as soon as anything starts popping up because you do not want it to get much sun. So you see it start to come up out of the ground, put the tarp back down, and come back next year and see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe a very thick, dark colored tarp
Absolutely, no
Yes.
light.
and making sure it's pinned down nice and tight so no
Yes.
space is allowing sunlight and
And you have to
everything
watch
else to get in.
for you have to watch for them trying to get out of the tarp too.
Yes.
So they'll spread outside of the tarp to try to get that to try to get that sun that they're not getting under the tarp. So it might require a little bit of extra tarping, but you got to be really proactive when it comes to like a tarping kind of thing, or if you're doing like a manual removals, you got to be on it all the time. If you give it a some space some and time, it's going to regenerate itself, and it's like your work was for nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Clyde?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's Sally in the background, humming and everything. We work together, we're Canadian, so we do call it DSV, dog strangling vine. Sally and I share in lands up north in the Kawartha area in Ontario. And we've had an infestation going back about 5 years now. We started tarping. We've had some tarps down. I guess this coming summer will be 5 years. In other areas adjacent, perhaps 2 to 3 years. So we're wondering when to lift these. It is definitely, as you can imagine, killing everything. With
Yes.
no photosynthesis happening and no light and no water, I don't think anything is going to survive. I did get a response from someone that the tarps only have to be down there 1 year. Okay, that's fine. But we're also hearing that the seeds, like I have read that seeds stay dormant for years and years. And I did ask this in the chat, and I think David Harris perhaps responded by saying that they only have to be down or that they're only dormant for 1 year. And then that's it. I guess they break up in the soil or break down or whatever. So this is encouraging to us. And on the perimeter, we have done some spot spraying, as well as Sally's been working around the clock the last few years, just manually digging up this dreaded invasive. So I think we're at the point now that we're going to start lifting the tarps. But it's also our understanding that the web of fungi in the soil will probably also have been depleted, if not removed, because they're not feeding on anything at this point. So I think you might have to have a follow-up enhancement of the soil. Is this seeming like what I'm saying to make sense to everyone there? I know it wasn't brought up in the discussion, and I know we've got a smaller infestation.
For a small infestation, I wouldn't work like by small, you mean the size of a tarp
Oh, no, no,
or
no. I'd say
okay.
an acre to an acre and a half.
Uh,
It's just a guess.
does anybody happen to know if there are products? So I saw that somebody was using Ernst seeds for mixes to oversee these large areas. Are there products that include some sort of mycorrhizal supplement?
Well, this is what I'm asking. And we're more of
Hmm,
in a more mature pine forest area. And I think the person that's heading this up is looking into how we're going to reestablish
I see.
yeah. So we're kind of we're in the research stage right now.
Yeah, I don't have a definitive answer on that, but I would think if I mean, it's a relatively small area. It's like there's, the mycorrhizal network will move its way back in. I mean, and it's kind of goes back to the goats. It's like the tarping is going to have the same effect there, where it's like they're, put it there if you say have a monoculture there where no native species of value, and then when you lift the tarp, put, consider, will natives fill in because you have natives surrounding
Mm-hmm.
that tarp, or should you do some restoration and planting in order to reestablish a healthy native population in that area, which I would imagine the fungal network there, the mycorrhizae would also fill in time, because I mean it's surrounded by healthy systems,
Mm-hmm.
on either side of it.
I agree,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard pretty much the same. I've heard that. Well, I think I don't think we can leave it to nature to take its course. I believe we have to put in plants on our own to get a good
Yeah.
start, and with those plants will come the fungi within them.
Yes, it's like there are some cases though there I've heard studies there were like they found after they did management, they were in an area with mostly native population, and it was able to just fill right back in with native species, because of the lack of invasives that were surrounding that area. But yeah, that's not most places. That was, most places aren't that pristine. So I would, say the best bet is to finds native plants, that are appropriate for the habitat where you're doing the management at
Definitely,
and are
definitely.
found in those areas.
Of course, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we don't want to introduce something else here that's not
No,
proper.
people do make those mistakes there, just throwing any plant there that
Oh,
native, that they believe is native, and sometimes you see native on something, and you got to consider what their definition of native is. Is that to your location or to theirs?
correct.
hmm
Yes, yes, yes,
hmm
yeah, yeah. No, I think we're on top of that and want to keep the lands as they have been up until now, and then for the future to be native and native to that area.
Hmm. Yeah, because it's
I
like
think
we use
I think
iNaturalist there as one of our tools. We do surveys
hmm
around our management sites, and we also go to iNaturalist, and we actually input our data into iNaturalist too, so that iNaturalist will give us an idea of what what the appropriate species to do our restoration plantings would be.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Was somebody else trying to speak up? And we will have to wrap up soon here because we have met our time limit.
Yeah, I
hi,
was.
it's
Oh,
Brian
George,
here. If you can hear me,
oh,
I just oh,
hang on one second, Brian. I think
sorry.
George was trying to speak too. Which one of you
yeah.
can go first?
Go
Oh,
ahead, George.
okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, I was just. I've never tarped before, but I just was going to make a suggestion on if you remove the tarp after 1 year, you may want to allow the seed bank to resprout. In other words, there's going to be if it's a site that's had swallow-wort for a number of years, there's going to be a seed bank in that soil. So by removing the tarp temporarily to allow the seed bank to any seed in the soil to germinate, and then reapply the tarp would seem to me to make sense. And the other thing I was going to comment on was uh, the length of the viability of swallow-wort. According to Lindsay Cornell,
Albrecht?
what's it? Yeah,
Nope.
Lindsay Marbrook. Yeah, he stated to me that what they found at Cornell and their tests, the germination tests, that the viability of swallow-wort seed is about 3 years.
hmm
That's what he told me. So I don't. Other than that, I don't know. But um, and the other thing too about reseeding after now the areas that I've been treating for many years are maybe different than what you're encountering up there by the St. Lawrence and stuff. But we rely heavily, almost entirely, on just the native seed bank to repopulate the
Yes.
area after we've
hmm
sprayed. We don't introduce any other seed or anything like that. We just rely on what's already there and what's nearby, and we've had great success with regeneration and revegetation of the sites that have been sprayed. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing, George. Did anybody want to respond to what George shared? And then we'll move on to Brian.
No, I agree with them. It's there. I think once again, it's a case by case basis. So it's like you got to look at what is your surrounding area, what's the likelihood of native species filling in that space that's now open because of your management there, and say if there's the likelihood it's going to be a lot of native species coming in, maybe you just don't have to do any native plantings. But if you're surrounded by a lot of invasive species, then there it would be appropriate to plant the native species in before the invasives get a foothold there in there, and all of that requires monitoring. So there's always got to be post-management monitoring. If you don't, you don't know what is going to end up filling in there, and you're not going to be there to make the correct management decisions, if you're not monitoring.
Mhm. Yeah, we do monitor, and I'm talking about my experience has been at sites that we have been managing for multiple years. So in other words, it's just not a one treatment and then walk away. It's areas that we have been managing for year after year after year. So we have that experience, and things have been working out pretty good so far.
Yeah, I mean we have that. I mean, say with
Mhm.
swallow-wort,
Mhm.
sometimes you have it very sparsely populated. So it's like if you go in and say you're spraying or manual removal, uh, those areas are very small spaces that are being that are being opened, and so they'll close up fine on their own typically. But like a monoculture, of plants, that's the one I say you got to be a little more cautionary on and consider what the likelihood of native versus invasives is going to be in that area and monitor and see what, if you need to, what the correct action would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. If you have like acres of monoculture swallow-wort, then that's a whole different thing than spot populations and doing spot treatments.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah. If anybody wants to see how bad swallower can get, it's like you can go to like Whaley.
Hmm.
It's just acres and
Yep.
acres of it. It's unfortunate. It's a very nice place. I like Whaley, but we really need eventually we need a effective swallow or effective biocontrol there to bring that population down because it's just so large.
Yep.
Mhm. Brian, did you have something to share? Thank you for your patience, Brian.
No, that's quite all right. Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing such great information. I guess, one thing think might be quite helpful if we could drill a little bit deeper on this whole business of post-treatment planting. What would work? What sort of strategies? Do you use what sort of mix do you use? Do you use some sort of it's like in agriculture, they often will use things like annual, like ryegrasses and things that quite quickly, but then they die out and other things come up. If some strategies around these cover plants could be useful. The worst case that my own experience is where we went in and we were successful in knocking back a patch with a herbicide, and promptly released this wonderful, robust stand of garlic mustard that took over the whole area. So we sort of traded off one for the other.
Yeah.
And so we sort of flexed our approach a little bit to being careful about sort of hitting hard on patches and really focused on dealing with the outliers until we can come up with some better way of dealing with big patches that are hard to work with. So that for us the focus has been on digging and getting that little chunk of a crown root out. And I've marked a lot of areas where we've removed them and not had any regrowth. So I consider that highly successful. But it's the really big, dense patches where this stuff is spreading out from. That's the one that I still have some concern about. Most of our work I'm talking about is sort of on a volunteer basis around the boundary of Charleston Lake Provincial Park, where there's a few patches we'd like to see not enter into the park if it's all possible. Thank you.
Good point.
Robert might want to elaborate on this more, but an approach that SLELO is taking is we're trying to select native species that are aggressive native species to plant in the areas where we did removals. We did just sort of like a pull and plant
Yeah,
technique
that
at
was a
some
new
of our
thing that
sites
we did
that
this
were
year.
smaller.
Hear
Yeah,
good things about goldenrod.
yeah. Well, we're thinking of going back into that area and doing some asters, goldenrods there. But this year I overgrew a whole bunch of brown-eyed Susans in little
Hmm.
plastic cups, and so the volunteers came and I came with like 200 of those things. And what we did, what I call the pull-in plant, where we dug up the swallow-wort in the field
Good.
and then
Yes.
dropped in a brown-eyed Susan at each one of those points, or a couple of
Yeah.
them.
And we
That's a good idea.
overplanted them like on purpose, like a
And
lot of brown-eyed Susans in the spot that we pulled up the swallow-wort.
I have them in
Good.
my yard, so I know they're aggressive.
Good.
Yeah.
Good
That was
suggestion.
our
Thank
our
you.
technique. But again, these are at the sites that Robert had mentioned that were smaller where we did manual removals with our volunteer network. So it's not something that we had done, acres upon acres, but I suppose you could do patches here and there, like maybe tarp an area and then work on that tarped area and then maybe, kind of like do like Swiss cheese and then eventually it'll sort of die back and be taken over by the natives in theory.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about some more of that on the next ELOSC if there's interest, which it sounds like there is. We can talk more about that.
Yeah, maybe share some plant lists and techniques and such. But we are almost 10 minutes over time, so unless there's like one dying question or one person that really wants to share one last thing, we'll have to conclude. And there will be a follow-up email and discussions can continue offline with all of our presenters and with SLELO PRISM. Thank you very much to all of our speakers today and for everybody for joining us and for the engagements. I hope you have a great day, and I will be sending out a follow-up email most likely tomorrow or Monday.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.